Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar on evaluating STEM preparatory pathways. My name is Chancellor Smith. I'm a specialist at the Chancellor's Office in our Education and Services Support Division. I just want to go over a few webinar logistics before we get started. Today's webinar will be closed captioned. To access closed captioning, please click the closed caption tab. That'll enable you to read the live captions. Our webinar will also feature a Q&A session. To access Q&A, please click the Q&A icon or the Q&A tab to enter your questions for the presenters, and they will read your responses. Just as a reminder, you will be muted with your camera off during today's webinar. Additional logistics, the webinar will be recorded. These slides and also the recording will be posted to the Chancellor's Office webpage. The link to our webpage is right there at the bottom under Equitable Services and Support, and to access all of these Spring Series webinars. Again, welcome to our webinar today. We're so glad you joined us this afternoon. Before we get started, I want to also introduce and welcome our lineup of presenters for today. Joining us for today, we have Erik Cooper, the Vice Chancellor of Workforce and Research at the Chancellor's Office. Terrence Willett, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Data Visualization and Research at the Chancellor's Office. And myself, Chancellor Smith, Community College Specialist in Academic Affairs at the Chancellor's Office. Mallory Newell, Director of Institutional Research and Planning with De Anza College and the RP Group's Multiple Measures Assessment Project, as well as Mark Cohen, the Product Manager for the CCC Tech Center. I just want to start with a brief overview of today's webinar. So today we'll share guidance on the AB 1705 guidance reviews, as well as going over the data submission template, the multiple measures placement services or the MMAPs updates. And before we close, we will also feature a live Q&A session. So again, thank you so much for joining. And without further ado, I will hand it over to our featured presenters.
Hi, everybody. We're going to start off first with a brief recap of the STEM pathways as we get into it. As a reminder, under AB 1705, students were beginning generally in the transfer level English or math courses that count towards their program with some well-defined exceptions outlined in the legislation. The preparatory coursework now is optional if students can demonstrate that the delay caused by taking extra classes will increase the students' chances of completing transfer level English and math for their program within a year of starting the sequence. In general, students needing extra academic support would be receiving it concurrently with their work with for example, co-requisites being a popular one, but it also is inclusive of embedded tutoring, supplemental instruction, and so on. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And as a recap of the work we did over the last couple of years to take a look at what the throughput was through STEM Calculus 1, depending on whether you started in a preparatory course or had direct access to calculus. So in this particular bar chart, the dark blue bars are those who started in some sort of preparatory course like pre-calculus, trig, college algebra, all rolled together in this particular analysis, and the gold bars are those who had direct access to starting in calculus. And then this is a high-level disaggregation by your placement level. So on the left-hand side, you have the low placement level students who had lower levels of high school preparation. And on the right-hand side, you have high placement levels, high GPA, higher levels of math. And even though you see that in general, the high placement students do better no matter where they started, overall, we're seeing for the students that we've had historically that they did much better with direct access to calculus. This causes us to rethink some of our preparatory structures, given the big difference between the preparatory pathway versus the direct access and the lesser level of influence of the high school preparation level. It's suggesting that we look more towards our structures than the specific content that we're taking a look at when we're really focused on preparatory pathways. So this is causing a rethink in our approach, and a lot of folks are engaged in innovative coursework and support services to help support this. And there was in December some rethinking about how we're going to approach things. So let's go to the next slide and talk about this innovation period that we're in while we're reflecting on what we know and what we don't know and what we're going to be trying out here. So during the innovation period, consistent with the law, all students do still get access to Calculus Level 1. And those who had completed the preparatory courses in high school straight into Calculus 1 is the recommendation, again, in alignment with the 1705 legislation that students shouldn't repeat coursework that they already completed in high school. There are some exemptions that are going to be granted during this innovative period. If they finished off at, for example, intermediate algebra, we're allowing colleges to offer a one transfer level course preparatory to calculus, for example, pre-calculus, or if they finished geometry or lower up to two transfer level courses such as college algebra and trigonometry. And so the memo allows for colleges to offer an innovative course option for the lowest placement students. But again, these are offerings, not requirements. And so if a student still has the right to have direct access into calculus under the law. But the intention of this revision was to allow for experimentation and innovation and evaluation so we can figure out what's best for students during this time period. And I believe at this point I get to hand it over to Erik to talk a little more about this.
So good afternoon, everybody. I think one of the big takeaways that we're going to try to emphasize today, and the reason why we're here talking about the evaluation template, is we've got a couple of years to try some things out, but as of July 1st, 2027, the calculus placement rules will again apply to all colleges with the exception of validated courses. So during this period of trial, during this period of experimentation and innovation, we need to also be building in that evaluation to those new courses. So as indicated by the memo that was sent out, any course that's being offered prior to calculus in the pathway will require that additional validation by July 1, 2027. It must achieve full validation status to continue with placement and as an enrollment option beyond July 1st, 2027. So between now and spring 2027, we've got a lot of data collection and analysis to do. If the course is not validated, colleges may not recommend or require the enrollment into the unvalidated course. Next slide, please. So going into the guidance that we received or sent out in December 2024, you can see the exact guidance here. So as Terrence was saying just a moment ago, for students who've already completed the IM4, trig, pre-calculus, or equivalent, for if those of you have got high schools that offer math analysis, that would be one of those equivalent courses. Beginning July 2025, they must be given access to STEM calculus with or without concurrent support. Students cannot be denied access to STEM calculus if they've completed that coursework at that level. Students who can successfully or demonstrated coursework through credit for prior learning, the IM3, intermediate algebra or equivalent, the college may enroll the student in a one-semester course prior to calculus, such as pre-calc, or in calculus with or without concurrent support. So those are your two options. If the students begin in a course prior to calculus and successfully complete it, their next course is STEM Calculus 1. Trying to be really clear about that prerequisite level. Enrollment in the course prior to calculus should be restricted to students who have not successfully completed IM4, trig, pre-calculus, or equivalent. Again, students must be given access to that calculus if they've completed those courses. Students who did not successfully complete or demonstrate through credit for prior learning, intermediate algebra, IM3, or equivalent, those students can be enrolled in a two-semester sequence at the transfer level prior to calculus. And again, with or without concurrent support. So much like Terrence was saying on the previous slide, we've got these opportunities to look at these pathways and then also validate them. Next slide, please. So for the placement enrollment in STEM calculus pathway for STEM students in majors that require STEM calculus, if the student had that high school GPA of 2.6 or higher and passed trig, pre-calculus, or calculus with a grade of C or better, they should be placed in the STEM calculus. They may have that low unit, 2 or fewer unit support that can be recommended but not required. For students below that high school with a GPA low 2.6 or did not pass trig, pre-calculus, or calculus, they can get into STEM Calculus 1 or require support. Students who have full validation status, students can begin students into those lower level pathways, but they have to have completed the validation. So this is where we want to be by July 2027. This is what we are searching for. Go ahead and next slide. Let me turn this back over to Terrence.
So we're encouraging folks to take opportunity of this innovation period, because some of the past research has suggested that some of the practices that we've been doing may not have been working as well as we thought, but that doesn't necessarily say definitively we should do this other thing. So this is a time for us to try to find that better path together. And this innovation period allows colleges to have the opportunity to create some comparison groups. You'll have students who are starting off in these preparatory courses at various levels. People are trying new innovative courses, support courses, aligning calculus content with target disciplines like physics and engineering to a greater degree, and making other support changes. And so this is a good chance, a good time to do this kind of innovation and evaluation work. And don't keep it to yourself. I think this is the most important thing. If you find something interesting that is really working, then send it to us and we'll help distribute it, or send it to a listserv. Don't keep it to yourself. Let's share our successes or our challenges with colleagues so that we can all work on this together. Before I turn it back over, there's a bunch of questions in the chat, some of which can be found, and some of the answers can be found in some of the previous reports. So we're going to start answering those and putting in some links to those. So keep those questions coming on in. And again, share your work. Don't be shy. Erik, let me hand it back to you.
Yeah, so there's couple of questions that are kind of variations of the same thing. So based on the chart that we saw back on slide 9, I don't know, Shanti, if you wouldn't mind going back. So a couple of the questions are related to where the students ended up. So yes, the school may recommend the course before calculus for students who haven't completed IM3, excuse me, they've completed IM3 or intermediate algebra or the equivalent, but not that next level. So you do have some opportunity there to make a recommendation, again, based on language in AB 1705. We're not necessarily preventing students from taking that gateway calculus course, but you can make that recommendation. Aisha's got a similar question. Shanti, if you could go to the next slide. There we go, with GPA. So one of the things that's important to remember about how the recommendations were developed, it was both based on the coursework that students were taking and also the GPA. And so this is getting us into that second layer of requirements. So by July 1st, 2027, this is back where we are. So we want to make sure that the students who are falling into that lowest band are receiving support. But this lower band, if your college has those validated those validated courses that are prior to calculus, you could enroll students into those courses. So I think, Aisha, that GPA distinction that you're asking about, this is going to be important for those colleges who have validated pre-calculus pathways, but may not be applicable for everybody else. And I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to answer any of these other questions. If not, I might hold some of these until later. All right, so the data submission template, let's go right into that next slide. So who should be submitting a template? Any college that is creating an innovative preparatory course for those lowest placement students or transfer level preparatory college students. So a college should submit the template if they'd like to seek full validation. So if you're a college that knows, hey, we want to give this a try, we think our students are going to benefit from a preparatory course, and you want to be prepared for that July 2027 deadline, you should be looking at this validation template and being prepared to submit that. So anybody for the lowest placement student, if you're enrolling them in that innovative prep course or an existing transfer level preparatory course, you're going to want to submit this template. Next slide, please. All right, so things that you want to be doing. How can you use the data template? Well, first of all, make sure that you've got data available. This is where, if you are one of the researchers in the room, prepare to get called by your math faculty or your deans in your STEM areas. They're going to be your good friends because they were already, of course. So make sure that data is available. Define and refine. You want to make sure you've got clear definitions of who belongs in the cohort. If you are a college that has access to the CCC apply data for the self-reported high school GPA, or if you've got some other sources, make sure you're defining that, make sure you're looking at it. You're going to want to monitor those outcomes on a regular basis. So IR folks, get prepared for your math faculty to be having these conversations at least once a term. Math faculty, consider buying your IR teams a coffee. Not a ringing endorsement, but a nice gesture. Discuss the outcomes. Certainly, deans, faculty, department chairs, you'll want to be taking a look at these pretty regularly, having those critical discussions about what seems to be working, what doesn't, and engage in conversations. Start now. You may even consider looking at benchmarks prior to AB 1705. If you've got that data available, go back and look at it now, see what it looked like. Next slide, please. All right, 3 standards. And this is, I think, where folks are going to enjoy this conversation more so than they already have. So in order to verify the benefit of the coursework to the students, colleges must meet all of the following. So the student is highly unlikely to succeed in the first STEM calculus course without additional transfer preparation. That is number 1. They have to meet that. B, the enrollment will improve the student's probability of completing the first STEM calculus course. So we want to see that they are more likely to succeed. C, the enrollment will improve the student's persistence to and completion of the second calculus course in the STEM program if a second calculus course is required. Key word on this is that, is it required? This is going to depend on the major. So if you've got major coursework that's going to require multiple courses in the sequence, you want to be looking at how are those students doing in that second course, that second calculus course in the sequence. If they happen to be, say, a biology major where it's only that first calculus course that's required, that C component we are not as concerned about, although you will need to look at that at the local level. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more. So you need to meet all of these if it applies. I'm sure I'm making friends in the Q&A, and I will get to those shortly. Let me turn this over to Mallory.
Thank you, Erik. All right, next slide, Shantae. So we have quite a few questions in the chat around data validation. How do you know that high school data is correct? How do you validate your data at your own campus? And what does validation mean, right? So this is what I'm going to talk about now. So we originally sent out a validation template when colleges were choosing their options during their upon their certification, if they were going to go fully to Calculus 1, if they were going to have an innovative course, if they were trying to seek full validation, meeting all the 3 standards that Erik just went over. The Chancellor's office is using a very similar template and is providing that to colleges. I put it in the chat. I can repost it. And I'll be going over that template that you can use now during this innovation period. And a similar template will be used prior to July 2027, where any college who's able to identify a cohort that can meet all 3 standards of the law could therefore technically continue to offer that transfer level preparatory course if it meets the 3 standards of the law. So now you will have the tool available to you to continuously evaluate through the innovation window, right? So you're going to be using the tool to assess any transfer level preparatory course that is allowable under the placement rules that Erik went over to populations outlined. So if you have an existing college algebra, trigonometry, or pre-calculus course, you're going to want to use the evaluation template to continuously assess the outcomes. If you have an innovative course, which we know quite a few colleges have made an innovative course. We had a webinar last week on an innovative course at Chaffey College, and your STEM Calculus 1. So you can use this template to design and evaluate your local cohort, right? So the cohort is defined as students whose first course of enrollment was in a transfer level course. So you want to make sure that you're not including students who started maybe in a basic skills pathway a while ago, or that you want to get their first enrollment in the course, and that's their starting point, okay? So you're making sure that you're really well defining the cohort. So their first enrollment was either a transfer level preparatory course, and that's their starting point, that they would be considered a transfer level prep start, that they started in an innovative course that would also be a transfer level preparatory start, or that they started directly in STEM Calculus 1, and they would be then a STEM Calculus 1 start. Just some definitions of what STEM Calculus 1 is. So you're going to want to use CID, and then depending on if you're a quarter school or a semester school, you're going to be wanting to look at the first half or the second half of the course. And so we have those outlined for you there, and it's also in the evaluation template. Next slide, please. So defining the lowest STEM placement student. So we're using the rule sets, the default placement rule sets, which will go into effect in July 2027. So that's what you are validating against. So you're going to want to create that lowest STEM placement group based on their first course of enrollment, either in that preparatory course or in the STEM Calculus 1 course. And a lot of people have confusion around the or statement. So that lowest group are the students with the high school GPA less than or equal to 2.6, as well as those who did not pass high school trigonometry, pre-calculus, or calculus. So a nice way to think about it is that there's three groups that you're going to include. Students with a GPA less than or equal to 2.6 who have not passed high school trig, pre-calc, or calculus. Students with the lower than or equal to a 2.6 who did pass high school trig, pre-calc, or calculus, and students who are above a 2.6 who did not pass high school trig, pre-calc, or calculus. So when you're thinking about that cohort and you're getting confused about that or statement, just kind of go back to the directions in the template, and it breaks it down to kind of remind you who's in that or statement. And again, going back to the rules, right? Everyone has access to STEM calculus. Students in the lowest placement group are the ones that can be assigned or recommended to the one course or the two courses during the innovation window, or students in the innovation that are in the innovative course. And that's who we are evaluating with the template. Okay, so next slide, please. So you're going to want to define your cohort, and you can either use STEM majors or all students. So there was some questions in the cohort around students who may not be required to, no longer required to take a STEM major. Can you remove them from the cohort? Yes, if they aren't required to take a STEM major, you can remove them from the cohort, right? So if they're not required to take that class, they don't have to be in your denominator. So you're going to want to determine locally what your STEM majors are that you're going to want to include. We have the most common STEM majors here and the top codes available just for you to have access to. But this is your local validation. This is your opportunity to tailor your evaluation to what best fits your college's needs, right? So you may include additional top codes for local STEM programs that require at least completion of STEM Calculus 1, okay? So this is where you're going to define your cohort. And if you know that at your college, maybe STEM majors switch around a lot or they don't pick majors, then you could look at all students, or you could do it both ways and see if there's any difference there. So it's really up to you to determine the best way to define your cohort. Next slide, please. Then you're going to want to define the time frame. So the time frames are outlined in the template as well in the directions. There's two different ways you could do it. You could use a fall cohort where you just track students who started in the fall, and you say, okay, if a student started in fall 2020, I'm going to track them for 2 years. If they start in fall 2021, I'm going to track them for 2 years, and so forth. And then combine those cohorts together to get the students who are in the cohort and the students that successfully completed Calculus 1 in 2 years. Or you could do an annual cohort where you're including anyone regardless of where they started, summer, fall, winter, spring, but you're making sure that when they start, they have a full 2 years to complete, which can get a little bit more tricky because you need to make sure you're tracking them for the full 2 years. But different ways that you want to do that when you want to work with your institutional research office, it's up to you. Again, this is your evaluation opportunity. So really trying to determine what best meets your college, a fall cohort, an annual cohort, or what have you. You just need to outline and define that in the template. But you do just want to make sure that students have a full 2 years to complete Calculus 1 and not longer, and 3 years to complete Calculus 2 and not longer. So there was a question in the chat around, if a student has 2 years and they start in Calculus 1, they could theoretically take Calculus 1 4 times until they're successful. And yes, if you have a system in place where the student has that many opportunities in 2 years, then yes, all of those attempts could be included in your cohort. Next slide, please. All right, additional considerations just to think about, make sure that you are mindful of these, that you're going to want to include just students who have an educational goal of degree, transfer, and undecided, especially if you're not using student major. You're going to want to exclude dual enrolled students because remember, dual enrolled students are outside of the scope of the law. And then you're going to want to create a cohort that best fits the STEM pathway model at your college. So again, many questions in the chat around data quality and unique cohorts and so forth. So this is your opportunity to locally validate your pathway and determine if it's meeting the 3 standards of the law. So if you know that your high school data may not be as reliable as you would like, you could put in additional checks for that, right? Maybe you need to validate it locally or find survey students. So whatever you need to do to build confidence in the way that you are tracking your students or entering your students, this is your opportunity to do that during this innovation period. All right, next slide, please. Just a reminder, there are multiple tabs on the spreadsheet. If you have more than one course that you're validating, say you have college algebra and trigonometry, then you're going to want to use separate tabs for each course. And so you're going to want to make sure that each course that you're reporting has its own data that you're tracking. So you're not going to be combining courses together because you want to specifically look at, is college algebra meeting the 3 standards of the law? Is trigonometry meeting 3 standards of the law? Is pre-calc and so forth? So on a course by course basis. And then please don't combine multi-college districts into one. Be sure to separate out the colleges just so that we're really looking at a college to college basis when we come to the reporting period in 2027. Next slide. All right, so now we're getting into what the template looks like. So this is a rather simple template coming from a researcher, right? I can say that, but we try to really simplify what you're reporting on. So everything that's in yellow, you're going to input into your template. You're going to want to put in your 6-digit STEM top codes. So what are you reporting, what STEM majors, or are you reporting all students, right? Either way is fine, and you can do it both ways. You can see what works best for your college. And then your cohort time frame. Are you doing fall starts? What fall starts? So really being descriptive in what the time frame is. Then you're going to want to include the course control number, the local course ID, and the course title, which are all available through the COMIS MIS, so the Chancellor's Office reporting data tool, just so that when you get to 2027 and you're going to be reporting it, this information is included so that the Chancellor's Office has that to further evaluate your template. Next slide. All right, so the first table looks at STEM Calculus 1 throughput by starting level. So remember, it's very important to know where a student starts, and it's their first course of enrollment. So you're going to want to enter details about the cohort of students, again, within the lowest STEM placement group. So the students in the higher STEM placement group need to be accessing calculus. And now we're looking at those lowest STEM placement groups who, under the guidance and the guidelines during this innovation period, can be required to have a 1 or 2 course preparatory sequence. So you're going to want to look at students starting in transfer level preparatory course or STEM Calculus 1. That's going to be your starting cohort. And then you're going to have your students who successfully complete STEM Calculus 1 in 2 years as your next entry. And then in the gray, the last entry is the throughput rate that's calculated for you. So your STEM Calculus 1 throughput rate for those students who started in transfer level prep course for which it was recommended to them. And then of those students over 2 years, how many completed STEM Calculus 1? Okay, so that's your first and your second entry. Your third entry is calculated for you. Now let's unpack throughput a little bit in our next slide, because there's often a lot of confusion around what throughput includes, and there's even some questions around it in the chat. So when we're talking about specifically STEM Calculus 1 throughput for transfer level preparatory courses, so students who start in a transfer level preparatory course, so something below Calculus 1, the throughput is the proportion of students who their first math enrollment was in one of those transfer level prep courses, and then who successfully completed it within 2 years. Okay, so there may be multiple attempts in there. I'm giving them 2 years to complete it. So the throughput rate provides students with those multiple opportunities to pass the transfer level prep course. And it also includes students who may have failed their first attempt, but passed on a subsequent attempt. So throughput is really giving them that leniency in 2 years to maybe withdraw or fail and re-enroll and take it again over 2 years. And that's different from a success rate, right? So a success rate only accounts for a single attempt of the course in 1 term. So a little bit of the difference between throughput and success rate, where throughput is giving them a longer time frame to complete that course. And then also something to note is that both the throughput rate and the success rate exclude students who may have dropped before census. So we get a lot of questions around exploring drop data and students who drop, and a concern that drop rates are going to increase if more students are accessing Calculus 1 rather than these transfer level preparatory courses. So some things to be mindful of is that student drops are not considered a valid enrollment record, as a college is not paid for students who drop, and a student does not receive a grade of record for a drop. So it's dropping before census. So like a W grade where a student withdraws, it is a valid grade of record, where a drop is not. But having said that, locally, you may want to explore your drop rates, right? You can explore with your institutional research office what if you maintain this drop data and what that looks like over time, comparing to prior years, comparing to this innovation window and so forth. But just considering and factoring in that throughput and success rates do not include students who have dropped before census. So just some things to be mindful of. Next slide, please. All right, so now let's interpret the data against the 3 standards of the law, which Erik went over. So the 3 standards are and statements. So they all 3 have to be met for a student to be able to fully validate their course and be able to continue to offer a transfer level preparatory course or an innovative course after July 2027. So the 3 standards, A, B, and C, Table 1 in the evaluation template addresses the first standard, A. Is the student highly unlikely to succeed in STEM calculus without the additional transfer level preparation? So another way to think about it are, do students who start in STEM calculus 1 exhibit throughput rate less than 15%? So when we look at the first example, the first chart, we look at those students who started in STEM Calculus 1, and they have a throughput rate of 56.6%. So in this example, is the standard A, the first standard, is Calculus Start less than 15%. So we have 56.6% is not less than 15%. So the student is not highly unlikely to succeed in STEM Calculus 1 without having had the transfer level preparation. So in this example, without meeting the first standard, this course that we're evaluating would not meet the validation requirements. Now, if we look at the second example in the second table below, we want to look at A and B now. So is the student highly unlikely to succeed? And if we look at the STEM Calculus 1 start, we see that it's at 13.2, and that is below 15%. So in this example, students who are starting in STEM Calculus 1 are highly unlikely to succeed without the preparation of having had a transfer level prep course. So it's meeting this first standard of the law. So now we can go to standard B. Do students who start in transfer level preparatory course have a higher throughput than those starting in STEM Calculus 1? And we see that 53.4% is higher than 13%. So in this case, this course is meeting standard A and standard B. So a little bit about how you can interpret the data within the template. So we also have a standard C, which we need to get to in the next slide. All right, so now when we look at standard C, it's now looking at whether or not a student successfully completes Calculus 2 if it's required for their major. So you're going to have to change the cohort around a little bit. So what you're going to have to do is you'll use the same cohort that you use for students in Table 1, but now you need to adjust the years to make sure they have 3 full years to complete STEM Calculus 1. So if you might have to remove your latest cohort from this analysis for STEM Calculus 3 to make sure that they have 3 full years to complete. So just really be mindful of your time frame here. If you are filtering on STEM majors, you also want to be mindful that not all STEM majors require completion of Calculus 2, and that's usually biology majors, and we found that these 2 top codes that do not require Calculus 2. So you'd want to remove those majors from the analysis for evaluating the third standard of the law when you're entering the data into Table 2, and this is all reiterated in the spreadsheet as well. So just being mindful that they have 3 years to complete and that they are making sure that they're requiring STEM Calculus 2. All right, so the next slide talks about how to interpret that data. So Table 2 evaluates Standard C of the law. So do students who start in the transfer level prep course complete Calculus 2 at higher rates than starting in Calculus 1? So again, is the transfer level prep start greater than the Calculus 2 start? And in this example, we see that 69% for those starting a transfer level prep course is higher than STEM Calculus 1 start. So for this last example that we get, it met standard A, it met standard B, and met standard C. So in this case, the course that we're evaluating meets all standards of the law, and this would be submitted to the Chancellor's office after the innovation window and could apply for full validation status, okay? So again, you're gonna be wanting to use this template to look at your courses on a regular basis and having conversations across your campus. Is this a cohort that we should be tracking? Are we confident with the cohort that we have here? Are we confident with the data? Can we access all of these data? And then having conversations around the outcomes, right? So that you can make changes during this time of innovation and that people are aware of the standards of the law before 2027 comes around, so that people know that this is what you're working towards, right? Is to meeting full validation if you're continuing to offer a transfer level prep course or an innovative course. Okay, so next slide is just if you're working through the template and you need assistance, we have the AB 1705 at cccco.edu email address available. So if you do need assistance, you can message there and someone will get back to you from the Chancellor's office. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Mark from the Tech Center, and he's going to talk about a service that's available to you, and then we'll continue to answer questions.
Thank you. So I wanted to provide an update on the multiple measures placement service. The multiple measures placement service was launched several years ago and provides placement recommendations generated from placement algorithm. This was established originally with the Tech Center, working very closely with the Chancellor's office and committee, and as well as with, I'm blanking on the name of the data partner that was providing a piece of it, which we are currently working to replace, which is the basis of the update. So I want to provide a little bit of an overview on the workflow and the data elements transmitted and where we are in the development of the next steps. If you could advance the slide, please. So as far as an overview, the multiple measure placement service works so that is tied into CCC Apply, so that as students apply, complete their application, we have a workflow in place where we call the CDE to obtain their SSID, and then with that, we reach out to CCGI or the California College Guidance Initiative to pull transcript data when they have that available for that student based on the CDE match. And there is a data hierarchy where when transcript data from CCGI is available, that is the data that is primarily used. When that data is not available, self-reported data that's obtained through the application process is used in its place. We will be implementing a connection with CDE to pull data from them as well, which will fit into that hierarchy. Currently at our launch of the revised system in the coming months, which I'll be talking about, it will initially be based on a combination of the CCGI and self-reported data. From there, we have a rules engine, which is currently in development. I had mentioned that currently that function had been performed by an external data partner of the Chancellor's office. We're currently replacing that workflow, having worked closely with Mallory and Erik and the team on defining the rules that will operate by. And then from there, the placements, there's a set of 4 placements for English, STEM, SLAM, and Applied Calculus, as well as a set of 4 true-false flags, which I'll be going over with you, which are then delivered to the colleges through a staging table connected to Superglue, as well as stored in the data warehouse. And just to provide a little more context on that, when we originally launched a multiple measures placement service, not all the colleges were on Superglue. We now have all 116 community colleges working with Superglue and capable of receiving that data through the staging table, which either is already configured or can easily be configured with the support of our enabling services group, and I'll be providing that information as well. We also operate a data warehouse that's available to researchers at the colleges and districts, and which supports a number of data sets, including the multiple measures placement service. And whether your college is using the multiple measures data or not, that data is still being generated for each application and stored in the data warehouse. If you could advance the slide, please. So I had mentioned that there's 4 placements that are generated by the placement rules engine. The first of which is the English placement, and this kind of a high level of the place recommendations generated, the basis for those recommendations based on the student data obtained from CCGI or self-reported by the student. The next category would be the STEM placement. You can advance the slide. Again, showing the placement recommendations that may be generated and the basis for those recommendations. And again, with the next slide for the SLAM placements. And if you could advance again for the applied calculus. So in addition to these 4 placement recommendations, there's a set of true false flags that are also delivered as part of the data set to the college along with the placement recommendations. If you could advance, please. And those are remaining the same from the current workflow. We may be making additional enhancements in the future, which we'll talk about, but these are showing, indicating whether Algebra 2 was passed, as well as recommendations generated for trigonometry, pre-calculus, and calculus. And as far as where we are, if you could advance one more time, please. So where we are now, we have been working the past months on the redesigned rules engine. We are near completion of that development, which we plan to release a major update to the multiple measures placement service software in early May. And that will include that redesigned rules engine, as well as incorporating the updates for the 4 placements that we discussed as indicated by the previous slides. When we are prepared to launch that, the enabling services group at the tech center will be doing outreach to the colleges around announcing both the launch and how to incorporate and work with this data if your college is not already working with the data, by enabling the staging tables through the superglue delivery. The email I have displayed here reaches out to the college experience managers in the enabling services group, and they can support with adoption of any of the tech center products and integration support. But that obviously will include the multiple measures upon the launch of the new workflow. And then as soon as we do launch that new workflow, we're looking at future enhancements for multiple measures. And one of the things we're very excited to do following this development is to really engage with the colleges to discuss the multiple measures placement service and the recommendations currently being generated, and identify areas where we may be able to enhance the service to better serve the colleges, and work that into our product roadmap in coordination with the Chancellor's office. As far as future development plans, we do plan to continue to evolve this platform. There's also plans to incorporate CDE data into that placement logic to supplement the data from CCGI and self-reported data as another data source. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Mark, we'll see if we can get to any Q&A that's specific to the MMPS in just a second. Most of the questions seem to be around the data itself, so we'll just give folks a moment to see if they can type their questions in, and we'll do our best.
A couple of themes that are coming up and a lot of questions. The issue of it takes time to develop curriculum, and by the time innovative curriculum comes online, they may only be 1, 2, or 3 semesters of data before the deadline. And so we're asking colleges to provide what information they have at that point. And I'm highly confident that there will be additional guidance as we get closer to that timeline. But we understand that it can be limited time and not as much time to collect as much data as you want, but do your best and provide what you have. I would say a corollary to that, people are wondering about, the template, and is the template the only communication of your findings? And I would say no. The template's meant to help organize your thoughts and have a simple way to provide the information, but we know that this can be complex and nuanced, and that there may be caveats or additional context. So let's say you have a full evaluation report that you happen to do locally. Feel free to send that along with your template so that we can collectively, get a better understanding of what you've been up to at the college. So don't feel restricted to just the template. The template's really a minimum. and feel free to provide supplemental information. There's also a lot of questions about, the methods and things like that. Put the links in, to the prior research in the chat here. We do support local research offices if they need like the code or more detail on how it worked out. We did do some webinars back in the day, but we're happy to work with local offices again. And if people want to try a new or innovative way to do the evaluation, especially incorporating some local data that may not be available at the state level, that's great to do too. So I think that answered a couple of themes of questions that were going around. Did you see some other stuff there, Erik?
I've got a couple, and I want to answer one question specifically that is talking about the GPA. I think one of the things that is, slightly confusing, and I'll blame me in how it was presented. The GPA rules, those are what is going to take place in January 2027. Those are the standards that we are being held to at that point. During the innovation period, we are following the rules that were in the December 2024 memo, which do not recommend or require GPA, right? So there's the distinction between what is occurring during the innovation period, and that is about what course the student took. And this is frankly to address some of the issues and criticisms that have come up about the numbers of students that are getting access to calculus from these various levels of math course taking. And so we're trying to address that. So for the purposes of the evaluation, we are focusing on what courses did the students take. So for the placement, if they did not have pre-calculus or trig or equivalent, they're one level below that, right? They have not successfully completed IM3 or intermediate algebra. They get one course prior to calculus. If they did not successfully complete algebra, or if they did not complete the intermediate algebra or IM3, they should have a 2-semester sequence. If the student hasn't completed trig or pre-calculus, they can have a 1-semester sequence. That doesn't have to do with GPA. Once we get out of this innovation period into 2027, that's where we are going to be paying attention to that GPA. This gets us back to the older bands. So there's a distinction between the validation that we're trying to do and the rules that are going to be moving forward. The second thing I guess I would highlight, folks are talking a little bit about, changes to the regulation. The answer is yes, absolutely. And we are trying to learn from all of you in the field as we are trying to implement this law on behalf of the legislature. And we've been given some pretty clear directions. And as we're getting information from you, our colleagues, as we're getting information from our colleges, we are taking them to the legislature and we're trying to advocate for changes. So as you are seeing changes, yes, it is happening. We are trying to make these changes to try to give our students the best possible chance at success within the laws that we're bound by. So just please be patient with us. We'll try to clarify things with FAQs. We'll try to get more information out to you. As folks are asking, when will these slides, when will this video be released? It has to go through accessibility and remediation. That takes us some time. We have some vendors who do that for us, and we are going to be working to get this out as quickly as possible. We're also in the process of updating our FAQs to likewise make sure that we've got as much information out there as possible. And with that, I think those are the questions that I wanted to answer. And let me turn this back over to the team.
Now let's briefly touch on the GPA thing and a couple of questions that came up. I think one way to think about the old GPA placement bands, those are based on prior research. And the idea is if someone had low high school GPA and they are more likely to benefit from support. So think of the GPA placement bands more as how much support do you need? And then this updated guidance is really much more about curricular sequencing and letting students pick up where they left off in high school. There's a lot of data questions around the GPA and the GPA sources that we've addressed here and there. I'll just say there is some projects at the state to have that centralized at the state level, get data from CalPADS, the California Department of Ed system, along with the CCGI project, and get that linked in with the community colleges. Because even, CalPAS and the CCC Apply, they've allowed us to do this type of work, and it's been quite useful. It's not as good as it could be. And so there are current efforts underway to make it even better. So thanks everyone for the questions. I'm going to hand it back to Mallory.
Shante, if you want to just put up the ab1705@ccc.o email address again, if people have outstanding questions. We answered 43 questions, so I think we tried hard to get to them all. I know we didn't get to every single one, but hopefully that helps clarify some things. We will be sending out, or the Chancellor's office will be sending out the validation template that we shared today more widely to the system in the next week or so with additional information about the placement models. I know some people are wanting to see the SLAM placement rules again, so that will all be going out to the system as well. So thank you everyone for attending, and we hope that this was helpful, and thank you for being here and continuing this work with us. We know that it is challenging work, but we also know that this is an opportunity for us to be innovative, try new things, test them out, and hopefully this tool allows you an opportunity to evaluate as you're moving forward and up and through July 2027. Thank you everyone, and thank you for everyone that presented today. Appreciate you all.